been at hundreds of panels at this point in the week, so I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. Today we're going to be discussing how autonomous vehicles and drones can combat things such as illegal fishing and potentially help us with other issues such as toxic emissions, illegal trafficking, and discuss really the ways that the technology can become a game changer in the industries. More specifically, I think we want to have a conversation about the potential of unmanned aerial vehicles and uncrewed surface vessels and how they can revolutionize ocean governance and effectively monitor critical maritime areas. There's certainly a need for this. If we look at illegal fishing alone, it's estimated to be the 6th most perpetrated crime in the world and annually creates economic losses of around $2 billion. It also disproportionately affects food security in small coastal nations who do rely on wild fish stocks as a primary source of protein. Illegal fishing, though, is just one of the problems that autonomous technologies can help solve. There are certainly a myriad of other ways it can support more sustainable interactions with the ocean. So to discuss both combating illegal fishing and all the other ways that we might employ it, employ autonomous technologies into the future, we're joined today by a really wonderful group of panelists. We have Mike Tinmouth, co-founder and COO of ACUA Ocean, which is developing the world's first hydrogen-powered autonomous surface ship as an IoT platform for ocean monitoring and protection. We have Antonia Leroy, head of ocean policy at WWF European Policy Office. She also leads the implementation of WWF's objectives to secure healthy ocean ecosystems and sustainable fisheries at the EU level. And then we have Badr Idrissi, the co-founder and CEO of ATLAN Space, a startup that helps build artificial intelligence to mimic human navigators aboard drones, allowing institutions to perform safe, cost-efficient, and beyond visual line of sight monitoring missions. My name is Anthony Bellafiore. I'm the investment manager for Katapult Ocean, which is a Norwegian-based early-stage impact VC fund. We focus on mostly climate and ocean companies. We also have some investments that we're doing in Africa. So Mike, Badr, Antonia, appreciate you being here again. Thank you for joining us. I know I gave you a brief introduction, but if you want to just quickly go around and say a few more words about what you do and the company, I think that would be a good place to start, and then we can get into the questions.
Fantastic. So Mike Tinmouth, Chief Operating Officer at ACUA Ocean. So we're a UK-based 2-year-old startup, and what we've done is developed a hydrogen-powered autonomous surface vessel, specifically designed to actually be operated as swarms for maximum geographic coverage. The idea here is that by actually having distributed maritime operations, more nodes in the ocean, we can provide better security, but at the same time, collect more data for research, for science, for security, and other purposes as well. So.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Badr Idrissi. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ATLAN Space. The project started in 2015, just after the Paris Agreement. We were very shocked to know that more than 20% of the world fisheries are illegal. Coming from Morocco, which is a coastal country, it was a real shock for us. We thought about using drones to fight illegal fishing, but the technology the current technology doesn't allow drones to go further than 50, 70 kilometers from the shore, knowing that the EEZ is 350 kilometers. So the developed countries are using airplanes, satellites, and vessels to fight illegal fishing, but developing countries doesn't have those financial and resources. So we built an artificial intelligence that removes the need for a human pilot and allows the drones to go much further and monitor more than 20,000 square kilometers per day per drone, identify illegal fishing vessels, and report them in real time to the authorities.
So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm working for the European Policy Office of WWF, but we have offices in almost every EU member state. And we work especially on ocean policies, but we also work with other NGOs and civil society in what we call the EU-IU coalition. I don't know if you saw the IU Watch also website. And today has been launched actually a global coalition to tackle IU phishing across the globe with the IU coalition in Korea, in Japan, in US. To coordinate our effort and to also understand practices that are happening around the world, the best one to be able to enforce policies.
All right, thank you, everyone. So again, the topic of this discussion is how we can use autonomous technologies and drones to combat things like IUU phishing. And we're just going to run it as a Q&A for the most part, and also we're going to leave some time towards the end for people to ask questions as well. Antonio, though, I want to start with you. Again, given the topic is how we can use autonomous technologies to potentially combat things such as IUU phishing, toxic emissions, trafficking, and other issues, as well as use them to better manage maritime in general. I just want you, would love to hear your perspective. Can you speak to some of the areas that you think these sorts of technologies would be most effective in doing things like this?
No, thank you. Indeed, I think there could be really advantage to these technologies because we know that it's a bit costly, to monitor the seas. We lack data also about the marine ecosystem. So such technology could allow maybe to also save some fuel, when you need to take a boat and go one day, to monitor the sea and you don't monitor, full areas. So I think there is an advantage here clearly, like to have a cost-effective tool to monitor fisheries and also to better assess, maybe fish stocks if there is observation data taken along the way. Now there might be some challenge as I'm working on policies and legal issues, but maybe we can discuss that. But who owns the data, how we share data, and so I'm leaving the floor before I'm going to.
This is a very, very interesting point because we fully understand that when talking to governments, data is something that is very, very sensitive. And in our policy, we don't own the data. The data is owned by the government because, one of the aspects of our technology is that the data is owned by the government and the government only gets the data that he wants. So for example, let's say that the MCS of a country, the monitoring agency of a country, launched a mission to monitor the ocean for illegal fishing. But in the same time, the drone was going over a yacht. People are enjoying their time. There were pictures that were taken of those people. There is also a sensitive privacy issue here. So with our technology, those pictures would be deleted automatically during the flight in the drone. So no human would have access to those information and those pictures, which really takes off the load of data privacy from the mission and also allows the government to freely use the technology.
Okay.
So actually, Mike, I want to go to you on that exact topic, actually. So obviously, there are going to be data privacy issues that arise for a lot of founders that are entering the space. And I'm just curious how you yourself choose to navigate topics around this. Bader just mentioned that they automatically delete some pictures if there's something that shouldn't be in there, but are there other ways that maybe founders can think about?
Yeah, I think the most important thing here is understanding the end use case. What is that data being used for? And we're collecting huge amounts. Some of that is visual footage, which obviously has got a degree of privacy. Some of that is, usable for sort of research purposes. I think it's working with those individual stakeholders, understanding what the specific use case is, but also where there are ways to optimize it. Are there sort of cross-departmental, when it comes to government, cross-departmental use cases? Can you segment that data and actually can you use the likes of AI and machine learning to automatically put up sort of internal barriers and walls where data belongs to one particular user versus another? So what we're seeing increasingly is what's called multi-stakeholder, multi-domain operations, whereby we're getting requests, not just for USVs, for uncrewed surface vessels, but also to launch AUVs, ROVs from a vessel. But then you've got multiple data points that could be owned by different people. So I think it's that segmentation, but also understanding the regulations in the environment and the sort of the geographical area that you're working, because no two geographies right now are the same. There's almost no standardization across these regulations, and in most places, the regulations haven't even caught up to where the technology is. So there is still that very big sort of gap to overcome.
Yeah. Antonio, I want to bring this to you too. Obviously, with the WWF, you work with a lot of government officials. and regulators, and I'm just wondering, what you think they should be aware of when it comes to legislating autonomy around the coastlines and out at sea. What are some of the challenges that you think they're going to be facing when it comes to protecting this data, and how would you maybe advise them to think about all this new data that's going to be shared and public?
Yeah, but I think, as we said, data privacy. So I think which data are kept and which data are also usable. If you want to go to court and to prosecute someone. And I think there was some technology before, and maybe it's a legal gap. So maybe it's for us to advise also, in a simple way, how policymaker can tackle that. Because if you go to court and the photo or whatever you have taken is not like legally a proof, cannot be considered proof. How its technology is useful.
So, I mean, technology by itself is not the solution. It's part of the solution. There are different components. As you said, there is legal enhancement of the laws of the country. There should be also trainings and capacity building. This is why, for example, in our case, when we're discussing with the customer, it's never ATLAN Space alone. So we're part of a consortium that includes capacity building, reviewing the policies and laws of the country. And from this point of view, we've built up some scenarios. So let's say that, for example, in some countries, the picture can be a legal proof for persecution, but it needs to be taken, for example, by an MCS officer. An MCS officer. So in this case, for example, the drone will be launched by the MCS officer, which is triggering the process of taking pictures, which would allow the pictures to be taken in court into consideration. And those
There's a question of responsibility. Who
is using and who is taking the picture. Okay. It's like pushing the button, but instead of pushing the button of camera, you're pushing a button in an operating system that triggers a process. So it's never a technology alone that would solve the issue. It's the whole process that includes technologies. And our technology doesn't come to replace what is existing. It's complementing what is existing. So for example, VMS already exists, vessel monitoring systems, with AIS, but when vessels are illegally fishing, they tend to turn off the AIS. Here comes our technology where we can take pictures of the vessels, understand, because we also include AIS beacons on the drones, understand that those vessels are going dark, and which increases the probability of them doing illegal or unreported activity. So it's not technology alone, it's a process, and we are complementing the existing technologies that are coming. From a cost perspective, you talked about vessels to monitor the ocean. The Coastal Guard vessels were not built to monitor the ocean, they were built to intervene. And what developed countries are doing, they are using light planes to monitor the ocean and satellite. Light planes are costing something between $1,700 and $2,000 per hour per flight, which in our case were 1/10 of this cost. So we're really reducing the cost for the governments while providing the same quality of information and complementing the whole solution.
Last question, I think, on sort of the potential pitfalls of regulation. As the space matures, obviously I think you'll see more regulation come in. Mike, maybe do you want to speak to some of the challenges you see down the road, maybe 2 to 5 years down the road?
I mean, I think, Joe, from the autonomy space in general, it is levels of autonomy and redundancy. That is, particularly in the USV market, is kind of one of the principal concerns. You know, there are sort of drivers from the IMO, but by the time those policies come into place, the technology will be 5 years further down the line, and we'll be addressing other challenges. So I think this is a lot about working with local regulators. We work almost day in, day out with the likes of Lloyd's Register and the MCA to understand what autonomy means, different levels of autonomy, but also when you're working, as you move towards sort of net zero propulsion systems, working with new and novel technologies, but also then working with the regulators who are actually looking at this from a data perspective and the various end stakeholders. There is going to be a lot more sort of regulation coming down the line, but it's all about engagement as early as possible through the planning stage.
If I may?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's really important, you say, like, as a planning stage, you really think, how this technology can be, included in this legislation, or But as it's really starting, so I mean, you start a pilot project and there is a gap legally or policy-wise. Did it happen to you? Like, how you overcome that? Like, of what was really concretely something that were not allowing your technology to be deployed?
Yeah, I mean, I fully understand what you're talking about. But when you're going to a developing country where the, for example, illegal fishing issue is overcoming the legal issue, then, I mean, people start listening to what you need legally and start adapting and trying to move on, not to infringe the laws, but to be flexible on some aspects to allow the technology and the project to go on. When a country is losing 1 point of GDP or 2 points of GDP because of illegal fishing, losing hundreds of thousands of jobs because of illegal fishing, this becomes a very critical issue that is not only in top of the head of the Marine Department, but also maybe the president of the country. So this is why the legal issue is, it's not tackled necessarily during the pilot project because they can move on the law and be flexible on that. But after the pilot project, of course, there need to be a framework that allows the project to go smoother and scale up.
So let's move away from illegal fishing for a moment, because obviously the applications of autonomous vessels and autonomy in general are quite vast when it comes to marine and maritime. So maybe Badr, if you want to speak to where you see the most exciting opportunities, and what do you think perhaps that these technologies will be best at doing when it comes to the ocean?
Yeah, I mean, there are different use cases where drones, unmanned aerial vehicles can be very useful. One of them is the IMO 2020, so the sulfate emission regulation, where drones can go and analyze the emission from vessels and report the ones that are not compliant. It can also be very interesting to use the drones in time-sensitive situations, like oil spills from oil tankers. Instead of waiting to commission a satellite to understand what's happening, you can deploy quickly a drone. Also, the drone is not manned. You can also deploy it where there is a critical weather situation where planes cannot fly. So if you are losing the drone, you're not losing a life with it.
And Tony, do you want to speak to that a bit as well? Where else you see maybe some interesting opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's also maybe a bit linked with criminal activity. We were speaking before, there is a risk. So, of course, if you have such a technology who can limit risks like life at sea, I think it's a great opportunity indeed. It's one of the use that it's appropriate. Right.
Mike, any thoughts?
And I think from this one, so we've all heard of the UN commitment to fully protect 30% of the Earth's oceans by 2030. We're currently at 2.5%, sort of there or thereabouts. The only way we're actually going to be able to scale solutions to do that protection and the monitoring that's required is through the likes of autonomy. The UK government has one Type 26 frigate costing $1.5 billion US, patrolling 4.5 million square kilometers of UK territorial waters. When the cost of capital ships and equipment is so high, the only way to actually really genuinely offer that level of security and monitoring is going to be through autonomous solutions.
From an investment standpoint, obviously, I come from that field, and it's interesting to me. Maybe what are some things, and this is a question for everybody, that autonomous vessels might not be so good at, and maybe some red herrings in the industry that investors should be wary of when it comes to backing companies trying to maybe build solutions around things that don't need autonomous solutions?
I think that the idea that some people are getting wrong is that they believe that autonomous vessels are going to replace the existing technologies. This is not the case. For example, in our case, we are complementing what's already exists. So, for example, there are some companies that are doing great job, like Global Fishing Watch. that analyzes the AI signals from vessels, identified activities. But then if a vessel is not transmitting the signal, they cannot see it. Where in our case, we can see it and we can report it. And so there is complementarity where if a vessel is live transmitting, then goes dark, we can intervene to understand what's happening exactly. So there is complementarity on the existing technologies, and investors should not believe that autonomous technology is going to replace all what's already existing, airplanes, VMS and everything, but it's there to complement what's existing.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say, I think the complementary side is absolutely right. I think there are a lot of near-shore use cases where the technology it really isn't in that operational environment. What autonomy does very well is the dull, dangerous, and dirty jobs, the ones where you don't want to put people out in the open ocean for long periods of time, or the ones that are happening at the fringes of the EZ, where actually to send a vessel out, you'll spend half a day or a day transiting to site, which is lost economic time if it's in a commercial environment. Or if this is from a security perspective, that's just lost time getting to that illegal activity. So what autonomy offers you is the prospect of getting there quickly or being on site. Whereas I think there's a little bit too much focus at the moment. Lots of solutions, very crowded market in the near-shore market.
What are maybe some barriers as we look towards the future of autonomous technologies in the ocean that are going to be difficult for founders to overcome? Or maybe difficult for regulators to overcome? I think we touched on that a bit earlier, but maybe better if you want to start by just explaining, potential barriers to entry or challenges that might come up.
The barriers to entry are mainly, as I said earlier, in the developed countries, because they already have solutions that more or less works. If you go to developing countries, they're really interested to solve the problem in any way. Legally anyway, of course. So the barriers are coming from developed countries where, for example, in our case, as we are operating in the sky, the sky is already overcrowded with airplanes and there are risks and so on. So the NASA, for example, has launched a project to define a unified airspace that includes drones, airplanes, and unmanned vehicles in general. So those are the barriers that we can see in the next five years. So how the overcrowded sky would interact with the manned and unmanned vehicles would interact in a crowded sky, especially if you are launching the operations from the shore. If you are in the middle of the ocean, in a closed airspace, you can do typically what you would like to do. But as soon as you're launching the operation from the shore in a crowded airspace, developed country, there may start to be some technological and legal barriers.
If I may, maybe a question for the future, because we speak about the carbon footprint, and everything. So I suppose each technology has also a footprint, maybe a low one compared to, the normal use. But I'm wondering if you're already thinking of how to improve the sustainability of the technology, like also the storage of data and everything.
So one of the side projects we're working on is really reducing the carbon footprint of the drones. So the current technology is whether electric or a mix of gas line and electric engines. So we're thinking about a platform that can be in the middle of the ocean where the drones can land on the ocean, hydro airplanes, get charged from a platform that is using solar energy, and then take off again and start monitoring again. So, and also, as I said, IMO 2020, there are regulations that are reducing not only the footprint of monitoring, but also the footprint of the vessels in the ocean. So also supporting the monitoring of reducing the footprint from those vessels.
I think on this one, we've taken a circular economy approach to the design of the vessel. We're also using green liquid hydrogen as the new fuel source. And I think this is one of the areas where regulators have got things, or starting to get things right. So in the UK, all new vessels being produced and operated in UK territorial waters have to be net zero by 2025. So that's driving towards new novel fuels like hydrogen. I think to the barriers question that just was slightly before, the barriers are alternative fuels. There is still a little bit of an unknown. Which fuel of the future is it going to be? Is it going to be ammonia or methanol or hydrogen? Is it going to be battery, solar, wind? And I think there's still decisions to be made in that space where things are going. But it is, a lot of these barriers are starting to be overcome now. And I think regulators are waking up to the need that actually they can drive policy positively forward.
Yeah,
I have also a really naive question, but we speak about the marine environment, and it's making noise. I mean, me, when I see a drone on top of me, I'm like, oh my God, you walk in the forest or whatever, or you visit something and there's a drone, it's making noise. So I'm wondering, also in terms of impact for marine ecosystem, like noise pollution, do you think about that?
So, for example, in our case, the drones that we use are flying at 500 meters from the sea level, which makes the noise impact very, very reduced. And especially when using electric drones, so the noise and vibration is reduced to the maximum, which, frankly speaking, we didn't make a study on the noise impact in the ocean, but from the tests we've done so far, there is not much impact.
And a very similar answer to that. So moving away from diesel engines, which have got lots of moving parts, making a lot of noise, actually hydrogen produces a chemical reaction, charging a sort of an electric battery. So we're seeing about 82% sort of lower sort of noise emissions, which is great both from a sustainability environmental perspective, but also when it comes to doing things like sonar monitoring, you're actually getting reduced interference in a lot of the data that you're collecting as well. So that's just another sort of side benefit to the whole sort of going green.
Antonio, coming back to your question around sustainability, where do you think from the WWF's perspective, where are you most excited about autonomous technology when it comes to potentially helping us get towards UN 30 by 30 or other goals that we have?
Yeah. So it's true that currently we're working on maritime spatial planning, for instance, and we have really few data on sensitive ecosystem. So countries are starting, but it takes 1-2 years. So, I don't know how much this technology can gather data, but really we need to know how the marine ecosystem is connecting between marine mammals, between the seagrass and everything, to be able to, after map which activity can happen where, and to protect this 30% and this 10%. And I think maybe, as you were thinking of having a platform for your drone to stop at one point, we know that there is more and more pressure at the sea space. So maybe a multi-use with offshore wind farm, could be thought, I don't know. But yeah, in terms of collecting this kind of data to help this maritime spatial planning, which is key for me to meet biodiversity and climate goal, to be renewables and to protect 30% and to restore 20%. And I'm not listing all of them, but yeah, maybe it's a question for you. How this can contribute.
I can take that one if you want. I think there's been some very exciting projects, particularly on the green hydrogen side, where actually the use of wind farms to generate the green hydrogen, looking then actually at reducing things like traffic into ports for refueling purposes. This could make autonomy and our autonomy a lot more exciting. If we didn't actually have to come back into the port environment, but could actually refuel out at sea on a wind farm, that becomes a really that gives us more endurance, more time at sea, so it becomes very exciting.
Putting my investor hat back on for a moment, how do we monetize some of the data that is being collected? What are sort of the most interesting business models that both of you are seeing? And I don't know, Antonio, if it's necessarily your area of expertise, but maybe something that you think might be interesting from a business model perspective.
For us, monetizing the data is not what we're looking for. It's really helping customers to achieve their, to build a sustainable ocean strategy, execute it, and be able to achieve their objectives out of it. The approach of being data focused as a company would make us own the data and try to monetize it, and then we're going back to the first question about who owns the data and how are you going to use it and so on. So specifically for the fighting IUU fishing or other environmental use cases, monetizing the data is not the main objective for us.
Got it.
I think from our side, what we're looking at is, we're looking at multi-stakeholders, so can we, alongside defense security data, can we also be collecting environmental data? Can we be reducing the cost of that data by having more data points, more vessels in the ocean, the cost shared between different stakeholders? But ultimately where we want to get to, where we see a massive opportunity here, is in the emerging sort of natural asset sort of capital space, and the ability to do validation of, we're undertaking activities to actually protect the ocean space. There are a lot of organizations and agencies out there. But what we actually require from a scientific data perspective is, what difference does that make? Is what we're doing actually having an impact on biodiversity and regeneration, rewilding activities? And can we be using autonomy as a way to collect the data over not just months and sort of a year or two, but actually over multi-years, to understand whether this is actually driving real positive change in these ecosystems? And is there a way that actually there is a new business model, blue bonds, the likes that are all coming up, carbon credits is something that's been increasingly talked about over the last few days. Is that a new opportunity to help finance some of these protection activities?
If the industry were to develop, this is a question again for all three of you to answer, exactly how you hope it will over the next 5 to 10 years. Where are we at in 5 or 10 years from now, if things go the way that you hope they do? Maybe Antonia, if you want to start.
Where we are, okay. We have a good mapping of the marine protected area, the renewable offshore area, and our protected area are really well managed, and maybe drone can help. It's not just paper park, there is a monitoring. So maybe we're there, hopefully.
So for us, is really about its financial, social, and environmental bundle that a government, because we're seeing it from a government perspective, a government should be working on. So for example, let's say that the government is launching an MPA. He would think about how the small-scale fisheries would be happening in this part of MPA, because he needs to build revenue out of the MPA to make it sustainable. Also, how he would monitor the MPA using autonomous technologies, how he would go for so it's really social, economic, and environmental bundle out of it. As I said, building economy out of the MPA, making people live out of the MPA, and making the biodiversity thrive in this MPA.
The only thing to add to that is I think absolutely that impact and that validation of what we're doing. So I think more sort of technology in the water, more data points, more validation, and then actually how does that sort of more broadly expand across all of the impact metrics that we're seeing? Because that's not just biodiversity, but that is around education, local community, social, economic impacts as well. And I think that'll be the real key, is when we're able to monitor those and have a sort of a definitive, this is the difference that we're making.
Mm-hmm. Speaking a little bit to the difference that you're making and how autonomous technologies can help with that, what is sort of the most interesting way you see autonomous technologies being able to quantify impact and help us actually define, as you mentioned, like the difference that we're making in the oceans?
I think it's about more intelligent, science-driven sort of data. I think we've got to align sort of the outcomes with what sort of science is telling us we need. And for that, we need more reliable, more robust data. We don't just need single points in the ocean at any single time. What we need to do is actually have a broader, sort of more distributed. I think we also need to understand the importance of all of the stakeholders across the maritime sector, the marine industries, local communities and the likes, and actually engage with them on a more holistic framework that actually measures that impact. I think we all use the ocean sort of directly and indirectly every single day, and I think actually being able to revert back and actually sort of understanding what that impact is and driving more engagement into this space will start offering up a more conclusive sort of outcome down the line.
Okay. We have a little over 10 minutes left, just about 10 and a half minutes. I'm wondering if any of the audience members have any questions. Do we have the capability to ask questions? Yeah, we do. Good. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Don't all raise your hands at once.
Maybe I can ask one then.
Yeah?
Yeah? Sorry. So I'm speaking with policymakers every day.
Yep.
The technology is really new. what will be maybe the 3 key criteria, or I don't know, facilitating legal framework, or I don't know, like 3 amendments you would like to see for your technology to be able to develop, and to be tested, and so you don't have kind of barrier. There can be adaptation later, but at least the baseline, the foundation, allow you to try.
So what would allow us to try is really to link the monitoring of the ocean with the creation of an MPA. So let's say that a country has just created a new MPA, and he would like to understand, before creating the MPA, he would like to understand what's happening on this area. Not only from a macro perspective, which is satellite, but also from a micro perspective, which is launching drones, understanding what's happening, understanding the behavior of, if there are fishing vessels there, or tankers, or whatever, what is the behavior of those vessels, how they are reacting to situations, and so on. Once this first analysis is done, and the government decides that this should be an MPA, because there is a huge impact, because, for example, there is huge traffic of industrial fishing vessels there, and they're all dark, they're not perceptible on the satellite. Once it's done, then this government would like to see whether he is enforcing the law that he's just created regarding the MPA, and launching drones to see what's happening there in a frequent, not just getting a snapshot. The first phase, as I said, understanding what's happening, is a snapshot of the situation. Then once he creates the MPA, he would need to have a continuous understanding of the enforcement of the law that is happening on this MPA. So once the government understands this process, we can support him with our partners to put in place the laws and policies to enforce those processes.
I think, sorry.
Ross has a question as well, and Ingrid.
Yeah.
I guess me naming the people in the audience is probably makes everyone think they're plants. That's okay.
They're not staged questions.
Hello?
Yeah.
I'm going to take this off. Yeah, so I'm just envisaging a world where ATLAN Space and ACUA Ocean are working together to turn paper MPAs into real MPAs, and actually helping to monitor and enforce on these MPAs. How much would it cost? Question for both of you, actually. How much would it cost for you to survey an MPA for 1 year, just to have an idea of the barrier that we're facing and how realistic it is? Is it a high barrier, or is it relatively low in terms of institutional capital there available?
What's the size of the MPA that I would like to create?
Sorry, I didn't have my headphones on.
So what's the size of the MPA that you would like to create?
Well, maybe you can give me like a cost per square kilometer, for example, or your Seychelles pilot, for example.
Yeah, so let's say that you've created an MPA of 100,000 square kilometer, and you would like to monitor this MPA once. So every kilometer you would like to monitor it once a week to understand what's happening and so on. This would cost you something around 300K US dollars.
Per week?
No, this not 300K to acquire the solution and deploy it. And it's because we're monitoring 20,000 square kilometers per day. So in a week, it's 5 times, it's 100,000 square kilometers. So you're monitoring your 100,000 square kilometer MPA once a week with one drone.
For 1 year?
For 2 years.
For 2 years, 300,000 for 2 years.
It's an acquisition cost. We're not. This is the difference. Our difference, because our specificity is that we're coming from Morocco, an African country. So we know that some countries have budget limitations. Some countries are not very keen to sign contracts that are leasing the technology, or that is making them pay annual subscription or monthly subscription. So what we say is that you get the technology, you use it as you want, you have a specific mandate, so we are going to help you enforce the mandate in the technology. So for example, you will not be able to use the technology for military purpose, for other purposes. It's only illegal fishing. You can launch it, use it as long as you want, unless you crash the drone.
I think that's something everybody at this conference should know, that there's solutions out there that can monitor large MPAs for as little as $300,000 for a 2-year period once per week. And then the fact that we have then all these paper MPAs without monitoring is baffling. So you should be shouting that banner from the rooftops. There's a high rooftop here. But yeah, get the word out. Please, everybody here as well. Thank you.
I'll just from the ACUA Ocean side of things. So what we're looking at is time to sort of a certain position. So if you're requiring an interception with the vessel on the water that's able to take this footage or make this intervention, then you're wanting to be within about 4 hours of any sort of given point in the ocean. We're looking comparatively. So the Seychelles have got approximately 8 offshore patrol vessels at the moment. If you were sort of operating in the UK, I don't know the exact figure of what it costs to operate one in the Seychelles, but in the UK, that's somewhere between about 20 and 30,000 US dollars per day to operate that offshore patrol vessel. By comparison, a fully manned 24/7 vessel in the water is going to cost you about $3,000 a day, so about a tenth of the price. But what we see is the ability to, rather than having one boat out at sea or 8 boats out at sea, if you could have 10x that for the same sort of cost that's currently being spent, then you've got that geographic coverage whereby you're collecting the data, you're providing more security because you can be in a location quicker. So this really does scale, but it scales when you have got more assets at sea. And I definitely think there are sort of use cases, and we're looking as well at the deployment of AUVs and UAVs and ROVs as well, of having multiple assets from a single platform. Because there are times when it is far quicker to get to a site using an aerial route than going by sea. So actually having the ability to deploy different assets gives you a whole different range of opportunities for sensoring and data, but also interventions as well.
Thanks, Ross. I think we have about 3 minutes left. Ingrid, if you want to.
Yes. We know it's important.
We can hear
Can you hear me?
the microphone.
No noise?
Yeah.
Yes, now? Okay, good. We know biodiversity is important, and you might use your solution, ACUA Ocean, to surveillance that. We need data to know how we're doing on biodiversity. But how is the market for that? We need also to cooperate with governments, because this is not something that maybe private would pay for. It's not important or not easy market to go into. So how are you working with the government? So how are their willingness to pay for this?
So there's certainly a willingness if you're able to offset or actually reduce existing costs, or you're actually able to scale out to the more modern solutions, and that opportunity is there. I think the more exciting opportunity when you go to governments is when you talk about sort of the likes of sort of new alternative payment for environmental services, getting corporates to actually cover the costs of some of this sort of protection and monitoring. That's where I think the real game changer over the next 5, probably not even 5 years, over the next 2 or 3 years is going to really start emerging. But for now, it's about offsetting costs with more sort of technology, more opportunity to make a real difference, and then being able to demonstrate it. Are you reducing that impact? Because we know that illegal fishing costs billions to small economies. If we're actually able to demonstrate that we're reducing those, then that has a net positive impact on local communities, local fishermen, also governments and policies and the likes.
Great, okay. I think we'll end things there. We have just about a minute over, or a minute left, so I think it's fine. Mike, Bader, Antonia, really appreciate that you've taken the time to be with us. Really enjoyed the conversation. Hope you did too. Hope everyone else here enjoyed it as well. Yeah, please give our panelists a hand. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.